Part 3 of The Last Little Cat. Remember last time the little cat was locked out of the barn? The last little cat sat at the door, but it no longer looked up and cried up at the barn door. It stared and looked into the dark. And the last little cat stood up and walked toward the dark and the shadows, and it wandered away from the barn and the door in the cold, dark night. It wandered into the world, but now the world was not full of sunshine and song. Now the world was a world of dark night. The little cat went into the world, and the little cat's world was a row of houses, stretching out from the barn in the night. The little cat's world was a world of 7 houses with closed doors in the night. And the last little cat went into the world, and the world was a world of closed doors. The little cat came to the backyard of the first house in the row of 7 big houses. At the back of the house, the little cat also found a door. The little cat sat and cried before the closed door. It opened its mouth to make the cries, but no sound came to make the cries, and nobody heard, nobody came, and nobody opened the door. But as if he had heard the cries that the last little cat couldn't cry, a big dog came rushing into the yard. The dog saw the cat, and he stopped and stood stiff and uttered a stiff, hard bark. The last little cat saw the dog. Up came its stub of a pencil tail. Up it came, straight up. And the little cat ran to the dog to snuggle itself between the dog's paws and tuck itself in under his chin to sleep with the dog. The big dog growled a stiff growl, and the cat just came on. This made the dog doubtful. This was no way for a cat to behave, coming at a dog. Cats were supposed to scare and run and scoot up the nearest tallest tree for a dog. But this little cat just came on. The doubtful dog looked this way and that. He twisted this way and that. He just did not know what to do. He stood stiff again, as if to think. But the only thing he could think was to run himself. So he turned tail and ran. All in a moment the dog was gone, and the little cat stood alone. With its pencil tail up, the last little cat stood in the yard and cried to the dog to come back. But no sound came to make the cry to call the big dog back. But a sound came out of the next yard. The sound came from beyond the row of trees between the first yard and the second yard. And that sound that came to the little cat's ears was like the sound of a closing door. The slow, creaky closing of a door. The last little cat ran toward the sound and to the door of the second house. But when it came to the back door, the door was shut, thick and tight and shut. Then the sound came again, the sound of the slow, creaking door. But the sound came from the yard of the second house, and the sound wasn't the sound made by the door. This sound was made by a sleeping dog. The sound was a snore. Way back in the back of the yard of the second house, there was a small dog kennel. The little kennel had the little kennel had been built to look just like a house. It had a sharp roof like the roof of a house. It even had a chimney. And it had a small door, like the front door of a house. Inside the small open door lay a bulldog, sound asleep. The bulldog, with his pushed-in nose, snored in his sleep. But the little cat, with its tail straight up, hurried in through the open door to the snoring dog. It crept between the stretched paws of the sleeping dog. Suddenly the dog felt the crawly, mousy feeling of the last little cat tucking itself in under his chin for a warm sleep. The dog, scared awake with a roar, he leaped straight up and out of his kennel. He leaped straight up and out of his kennel, straight up and over the last little cat. His chain rattled out behind him, past the little cat. The scared dog could run only as far as the length of his chain, and then the chain jerked him back and threw him down to the ground. there lay the bulldog outside his kennel at the end of his chain. The little cat sat inside his kennel. The dog lay miserably on the ground and looked miserably at the cat in his kennel. And then he yelped for help. Yelp, yelp, yelp! He yelped and yelped for help, and he made miserable sounds through his pushed-in nose. In the second house, they heard the yelps and the bulldog's miserable sounds. The door of the house flew open, and a man came running with a flashlight. He flashed the light into the yard. There lay the dog, thrown to the ground at the end of his chain. The man flashed the light into the kennel, and there sat a little cat. A cat? The disgusted man said loudly to the bulldog. And only a small little cat at that. I thought the way you were yelping it was at least a skunk, or two, or maybe even three. But one small cat? Why, for punishment, I ought to let you stay out in the damp, on the cold ground all night, and let that little cat sleep in your kennel. The man got down on hands and knees and put his face before the little door. His big face filled the door. Inside the kennel, the little cat stared with big saucer eyes at the big face that filled the door. You can't stay in there, the big face said to the big-eyed cat. With you in there, that dog of mine would yelp all night. Besides, you shouldn't be in his house. You should be in your own house. At night, little cats like you should be at home, or they get lost. He tried to reach the little cat, but the little cat drew back. Well, if I can't pull you out, the big face said, I'll have to scare you out. Scat, cat! And the man raced up and slapped his hand down on the roof of the little kennel house. The sound of the slap on the roof was like the sound of a clap of thunder. The little scared cat shot out of the house between the knees of the kneeling man. He tried to hide between the knees, but the man picked up the trembling cat. Oh, I didn't mean to scare you like that. I only meant to scare you home. He stroked the little cat and cuddled it in the crook of his arm. It was warm in the crook of the big man's arm, and the little cat was not afraid any more. The little cat purred for the man. The man picked up the flashlight and flashed the light on the little cat as he held it in the crook of his arm. Hey, the man said, now that I see you better, I think I know where you belong. Why, right next door, little cat. It seems to me I've seen a cat there off and on. Yes, I do believe you live next door. And for scaring you, I'll carry you home. The man took the little cat onto the porch and to the back door of the third house. The man pounded on the door, but nobody answered. Nobody came. That's funny, the man said to the little cat. I'm sure they're home. The lights are on. It must be that they're looking at television and they didn't hear my knock. But that reminds me, I'm missing my own television program. It's on right now. He knocked hard and impatiently on the thick, solid door, but nobody answered. Nobody came. The man looked down at the little cat in the crook of his arm. I'm sure you belong here, he said doubtfully. I'm sure I've seen a cat here off and on. Well, no doubt after the television program they'll come to the door, and they'll let you in. But I'm missing my program. And suddenly he set the little cat down, and suddenly he rushed away home and left the last little cat sitting before the closed door.